I, 21 female, celebrated my 21st birthday a couple of days ago with my family. I just invited my family and none of my friends because I was hosting this dinner to reveal something very important to everyone. My grandmother had passed away 3 weeks ago, and now it was finally time for me to tell everyone what she'd told me. I was a little nervous about telling my family what I'd known for so long, and so I'd decided to rip off the Band-Aid on a day that they couldn't possibly get mad at me. Unfortunately, they did get really upset with me, and that's the whole reason that I'm here at all. 5 years ago, a week after I celebrated my 16th birthday, my grandmother fell really sick. My grandmother and I were close, and I'd actually say that she's the one who actually raised me more than my parents. I used to live with her when I was little because my dad had to travel almost every day for work and my mother would accompany him, so they'd left me with my grandma. And she's really the one who took care of me. As far as I know, my parents let my grandma take over when I was 3 years old, and they finally came back when I turned 12. So 9 whole years my grandmother was the one who looked after me while my parents were out in different parts of the country for work. When I was 7 years old, they also had another child, but my grandmother put her foot down and told them that they'd have to take care of my brother themselves. She was getting older, and it was hard enough as it is to look after one child. She couldn't handle another one. So my brother stayed with my parents, and I stayed with my grandmother. We'd all only get together once or twice a month for a couple of days, but even then I wouldn't feel particularly connected to my parents. I didn't even feel like they were my parents. For me, my grandmother was both my mother and my father. She was my whole world. And if I'm being honest, I did resent my younger brother a bit, since my parents had chosen to travel with him and keep him close, but that's not what happened with me. I was a little jealous of him, but then I knew that come what may, my grandma would love me more anyway. We were a family per se, but it always felt like we were divided into 2 units, even after my parents moved back home. It was always my parents and my brother as one unit, and my grandmother and I as another. So obviously my parents and I were never truly able to connect like parents and their children actually should, because I spent the formative years of my childhood away from them. The same goes for my brother. I was never actually able to see him as my brother and had no sibling-y protective feelings towards him at all. We grew up very emotionally disconnected, and even after so many years of living together, we're still struggling to truly bond. When I turned 11, my father finally managed to find a better-paying job, and so he came back home and moved into my grandma's house so that we could all live together. My grandmother and my father were often at loggerheads, and he sometimes crossed a line while arguing with her. She would often tell me that he wouldn't have had the audacity to be so rude to her had my grandfather been alive, but unfortunately my grandpa had passed away when I was just 5 years old from a cardiac arrest. This is one of the biggest reasons why our household felt so divided, because I'd obviously always take my grandmother's side when it came to arguments, and my mother and brother would be on my father's side. These arguments were usually either about money or about how to raise my brother and me, where my grandmother and my father had very different ideologies. My father believed that kids are best left alone and that it's dysfunctional to constantly keep an eye on them, whereas my grandmother believed that kids need to be watched over all the time to keep us out of trouble. And as for the arguments about our finances, they didn't happen because we didn't have enough, but more because we had too much. My father led an extravagant lifestyle, but my grandmother believed that he should be more cautious about spending his money and saving more for our future, instead of spending it all on fancy designer clothes for all of us and expensive vacations every few months. My parents believed that my grandmother shouldn't have a say in what my father does with his hard-earned money. But honestly, I could see where my grandmother was coming from. Even when it was just us, my grandmother wouldn't spend her money on unnecessary things and had taught me to do the same. That's not to say she was a miser. She'd definitely spoil me once in a while with whatever I asked for, but that's the important part. She'd do it once in a while and not all the time, so that I didn't grow up to be a stereotypical rich brat with no sense of fiscal responsibility. So this was my childhood, just really freaking complicated. And like I said, my grandma fell really sick a few days after my 16th birthday, and one day she told me to lock the doors because she wanted to speak to me in person just in case she didn't recover from this. That scared the crap out of me back then, but she told me that what she had to tell me was really important, and so I absolutely had to hear her out. That day she told me a huge secret that I carried with me for the next 5 years and revealed only a few weeks ago once my grandmother was no longer with us. Back then, she'd told me that if she passed away, she wanted me to tell my father that he wasn't actually her son. She told me that my grandpa had been married once before, but his ex-wife ran off with his brother and left him with a 1-year-old son to raise all by himself. My grandmother happened to be their neighbor, and she'd always been in love with my grandpa anyway, so she decided to get married to him and raise that child as her own. She'd wanted to explain everything to him once he came of age, but was never able to, and the older he grew, the more difficult it became to bring something like this up. But there was another reason that she was telling me all of this, and that was because she'd changed her will a few months ago, and now, after she passed away, all her money and the properties that once belonged to her and my grandpa would belong to me. She had initially wanted to leave it to my father, but she changed her mind after he moved back, and she realized that she actually trusted me a lot more than she trusted him, because she felt that my father would sell everything she loved if it really came down to it, but I would understand the sentimental value. And she admitted that not only did she trust me more, but she also loved me the most in the family as well, which was touching, and I remember both of us crying in that room out of fear that this could potentially be our last real heart-to-heart conversation. She told me that I was not to breathe a word of this to anyone until I turned 18 or until she passed away, whichever happened first. I'm always going to be so thankful that she didn't pass away back then and was able to fight cancer for a full 5 years and spend some more time among us, and actually watch me graduate from a college she'd dreamt for me to attend, before she actually breathed her last a few weeks ago. I'd managed to put off the reading of her will for long enough, but her lawyer told me that we'd have to do it soon enough because my father had been asking about it almost every day now, and he couldn't make up excuses any longer. So, on my 21st birthday, I finally decided to reveal the truth to everyone. By everyone, I meant my parents, my brother, and my grandaunt, my grandmother's younger sister. My grandaunt lived in Germany, but she'd visit once or twice a year, and my grandmother would be really happy to reunite with her sister whenever that happened. She'd also left her favorite and very expensive diamond necklace to her sister, so I thought that she definitely deserved to be here. She already knew the truth about my father, but she didn't know that my grandmother had left her anything, which is why I'd invited her. And also because I was certain that I'd need someone on my side for emotional support when I finally told my family the truth that I'd known for ages now. So after dinner and drinks were done with, under the pretext of raising a toast to my late grandmother, I decided to use that as a segue to talk about her will. It was really uncomfortable, but I knew that it had to be done, and I had to be the one to do it because my grandmother had entrusted this job to me and nobody else. So I powered through my speech and somehow got it out that my dad wasn't actually my grandmother's real son, and that she'd left everything to me instead of him because she'd told me to pass on this message after she was no longer with us because she believed that my father deserved to know the truth. She'd also told me the address and contact information of my dad's birth mother, and I also passed that on just in case he wanted to get in touch with her. But my father didn't seem as interested in his parents as he was in the inheritance. He ignored that bit altogether, and the first question he asked me after I was done talking was whether I was going to split the inheritance or not. Before I could even reply to that, he said that he already knew that the house that my grandmother had left to me would obviously belong to him now, and even told me to talk to the lawyer and get the paperwork done as soon as possible. That rubbed me the wrong way, because I'd just told him that my grandma had left everything to me, including all her property, the house I grew up in, and her old house, the one she'd inherited from her parents. I reminded him that it actually belonged to me now, and he very arrogantly told me that I'd obviously be transferring it to him instead, because he had more of a right on that house than I did, since he'd grown up in that house. I argued with him, saying that even though I'd grown up in that house, and unlike him I was still living here, whereas he'd moved out once I started college into a better house with a more upmarket address so that he could impress all his friends and colleagues. He'd abandoned my grandmother, I hadn't. I told him that while I was willing to consider splitting the money from the inheritance, the house was non-negotiable. My father and I then got into a really heated argument over it, and eventually even my mother joined in and my grandaunt had to intervene to stop things from going even more out of hand than they already had. My parents believe that I should not only split the money with them, but I should also transfer the house my dad grew up in for sentimental reasons, as if I don't have the same reasons to want this house. And I've been living here ever since I was a child, so I want to continue living here. Whereas they already have another house, so it's not like they'll be homeless if they don't get this house. My dad even tried to manipulate me emotionally by saying that he just found out that the woman he'd believed was his mother all this while wasn't actually his mother, so just to compensate for the shock of it all, and because I'd kept this a secret from them for so many years, I owed them this house. I don't think that's fair at all, and I told them that whatever happens, I'm not giving up the house. So my parents then proceeded to call me a selfish brat and told me that they'd take me to court and make sure that they got everything they deserved, and I ended up with nothing before they left. My grandaunt was very disturbed, and so was I, so she spent the night and comforted me while I cried. I'd already lost the woman who meant the world to me, and now I was about to lose either the rest of my family, or I'd have to lose the place I'd called home for my entire life. It felt really unfair that my father was asking me to give up something that meant so much to me, but nothing more than just another building to him. And I know that's what it really is. He doesn't actually care about this place the way I do, because when he announced his decision to move out, he'd actually said that this house was nice, but he'd found a better and more befitting place to live in, and even wanted my grandmother to sell this house so we could all move. She'd put her foot down and said that while he was free to do whatever he wants to, she wasn't going to leave. That led to another defining fight, which ended with my parents and brother moving out and my grandmother and I choosing to stay back. We did meet after that as well, but whenever they'd visit us or we'd visit them, it felt weird and strained. It was more out of obligation than anything else, to be honest, so I really don't think there's anything unfair about me wanting to keep the house for myself. I'm still willing to negotiate and give my father half of the inheritance money, since that's what he really wants, but I'm not ready to give up the house. Am I the a-hole for not wanting to give up the house I inherited from my grandmother? Update 1. Hi everyone. It's been a few days since I posted here, and my father and I still can't agree on what to do about the inheritance. But before I start talking about what happened during these past few days, I just want to thank everyone who took the time to offer me advice, and for their kind words. That was really helpful, and since I can't exactly discuss these things with my friends right now because of how personal it is, I really do appreciate all the advice and love that everyone has been sending to me. Thank you, everyone. I spoke to my father last evening, and this time it was just us. My mother wasn't on the call with him, and neither was my grandaunt here to diffuse the situation, either in case it got too tense. He tried to reason with me by saying that since he'd grown up in this house way before I was even born, he deserved it more than I did. Also, the fact that he was already beginning to feel out of touch with his mother ever since he learned that she wasn't actually his mother was more reason for me to let him keep the house. I feel like I have to mention that this house that we're both fighting over doesn't just hold sentimental value, but it's also a total steal. It's a huge 2-story bungalow with beautiful Victorian-era inlined architecture and a picket fence. It's just a stunning house overall, and if I were to sell it today, I'm sure it would easily fetch a huge amount. So instead of arguing with my father and talking in circles, I decided to ask him point blank about what he intended to do with the house if I were to, hypothetically, let him have it. That's when he started fumbling, because both of us were very well aware that he only intended to sell this place because to him only the price tag mattered. He tried to tell me that he'd move back, but when I asked him what he intended to do with the house that he currently lived in if he moved back here, he got mad and said that I was being too nosy and these things were none of my business. I knew for a fact that his irritation at me questioning him was because he knew that I wasn't going to give the house up. And I confirmed it for him right after he said that it was none of my business what he did with the house. I told him that this house was rightfully mine since my grandmother had left it to me and not him, so now he needed to stop trying to fight me over it, or the next time we'd be speaking it would be in the company of our respective lawyers. He started yelling at me after that, but I didn't pay much heed to it and hung up. Although I hardly think that he's the kind of person who will just give up something like this, but I sure hope he does. I'm too tired and sad to fight. Update 2. Hi, so, a couple of things. I would really appreciate it if people refrained from calling my late grandmother names. I can't believe that this even has to be said, but some of you are going overboard with the comments. I do realize that she probably should have told my father the truth herself while she was still alive, instead of getting me to do it after she's gone. But calling her manipulative and cunning is taking things a bit too far. She's still my grandmother, and I still do love her, so I don't appreciate that at all. I don't know why she made me tell my father, but that was just one little thing I could do for her, since she's never asked me to do anything else her entire life, and has always been the support system I'd needed. So this was the least I could do for her. I guess she just didn't want to pass away knowing that her son was mad at her, even though they weren't on the best of terms already. She didn't want to make things worse before she passed away. That's what I think, but I'll never know for sure anymore. But I will request people to be kind in the comments and in my DMs, because calling my grandmother manipulative is really not as helpful as everyone thinks it is. I spoke to my grandmother's lawyer, now my lawyer, yesterday, and she told me that we don't need to worry even if my dad decides to contest the will. For starters, he's not her son by blood, and whatever his father had left him, he's already received, so he's not entitled to my grandmother's money and property anyway. Also, I'm the one who was her primary caregiver because my father moved away a few years back, which is around the time that my grandmother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She fought for 5 long years, and I was there with her every step of the way. From her chemo appointments to taking care of her at home, I was the one doing it all. Obviously, I did have help as well because we did hire a full-time nurse, but I also stayed with her and took care of her while my father would only visit sometimes. So legally speaking, my lawyer reassured me that he didn't have a leg to stand on and wouldn't be able to change anything. That's a huge relief because I really don't want to lose this house. This is the place I grew up in, and all the good times I had, all the milestones I achieved, my whole life up until now has been spent here, and I want to continue living here. It'll feel like I'm living with my grandmother even though she's not actually here. I miss her terribly, and this house isn't just a house to me, it's my home. I don't have anything about my father on a personal level, but I don't think he'll ever understand what this place means to me. He grew up to be a spoiled brat despite my grandparents' best efforts, and now he only sees the price tag attached to things and not the sentimental value. I know it's practical, but it's just really sad if you really think about it, because right now he has almost everything he needs to be happy, but he's still fighting with me over this place and making himself unhappy on purpose, when he can just let go gracefully. But I'm not afraid of fighting back anymore because I know I'm not going to lose my family, as I'd said in my first post. My parents were never really my family at all, and it's too late to fix things now. My brother is too young, and he'll obviously only be influenced by what our parents think and believe, so I can't count on him either, and my grandaunt is flying back to her family in just a week, so I'm on my own now. I'm not afraid of losing anyone, so my father can bring it on, if that's what he really wants to do. Update 3. I arranged a meeting today with my dad with our lawyers present, just in case, to tell him once and for all what my decision was. He agreed to meet me for lunch very happily because I think he believed that I was finally giving up ownership of the house. So we met for lunch today, and he seemed pretty happy until I finally sat him down and informed him that I had decided to stick to my decision of keeping the house, and I wouldn't be splitting the inheritance money with him either, because since it had all been left to me, I was the only one entitled to it. And his behavior had proven that he didn't really care about my grandma and so didn't deserve anything that belonged to her. That led to us getting into another fight, and my dad told me that he was going to cut me out of his life entirely if I didn't change my decision, but I accepted that since I already knew I was on my own. He was very agitated and was being very loud and obnoxious, like an entitled child, so by the end of the meeting I was actually glad that this would be my last meeting with him. He kept threatening to take me to court, but judging by his lawyer's face, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Even the poor guy seemed embarrassed to be seen with this screaming mess of a man, which is fair. I'm actually hoping that my dad disowns me legally or something, because after all this, I don't want to be associated with him anymore.